a loud voice, so thank God for a microphone that is working well. Okay. All right. I am so happy to see all of you. Nice to meet all of you. I can't believe I'm in Cambodia. But God had an amazing year for me to send me to Cambodia this year. I said yes to come to Cambodia January 1st, according to my diary. And I said during pandemic years, I prayed a very specific prayer to God. It's a silly of me, sort of being like a Gideon in the Bible. It's like, you put the dry sponge and ask God to make it soft, or, do the opposite, whatever. So I was like telling God, it's like, if you really want me to go to mission, I want it to be in a very particular way. I want to be invited. Because our church is very active in mission too. My husband goes to mission all the time. He's a pastor, so it's his job. He gets paid for it, right? But as for me, I said, I don't want to just sign up for mission that church put out, announced, and ask everybody and anybody to come. Please invite me. And Pastor Jenny invite some of us very specific. So I knew immediately, I can't say no to this. But before I go into the testimony, this is part of the testimony. And I had a certain sort of frame of testimony that I was going to share that I prepared. But last night about 1 a.m., I woke up from my deep sleep, and God just brought something in my memory, and I had to reshuffle. And I'm just going to go with God. And this is something Pastor Robert does often. He prepares sermon, but then God asked him to preach something else. I'm not him, but he kind of did that last night. It's something about divine appointment. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term divine appointment. And I pray this all my life. God, I ask for divine appointment. Like in Cambodia, I ask God for divine appointments in Cambodia. So we meet many people in our life, and some of them, are very meticulously planned by God. And it's God's design, whether for a certain period of your life or for specific season of your life. And these people, these divine appointments really shape you, who you are or who you become, and lead you to a certain path that God has for you. So I met Pastor Robert, about 26 years ago, during my college years, at a large conference for Korean American Christian college students in Boston. And I was still adapting to English ministry at the time because I was more used to Korean-speaking traditional Korean church, and I was just transitioning in college years to the English ministry. So I went to this kind of English-speaking large conference for the first time, and Pastor Robert was one of the speakers. I don't remember detail of what he spoke, but all I remember is he really spoke hard, like God really spoke through him. And I couldn't control my tears. I had to go up to him, and I don't remember the detail, but I think I shared with him about my dad issue. Like I was really struggling with my dad. And I know he prayed for me, and I was weeping and weeping. And he basically prayed for that void that I have in my heart about my dad. Fast forward, and about 15 years after I met him, that one moment as a conference speaker, and I forgot about him. I moved on. I'm already married. My husband's serving as a youth pastor at a church, but I was really struggling in my marriage, and I was so depressed. I had a daughter who was about 2 years old at the time. I just got laid off from job because America was going through a lot of recession at the time. And I was so miserable. And I was thinking about this possibility of maybe leaving my husband and leaving the church. And my spiritual mentor, Moon, who just spoke before me, she's been walking with me ever since, I was married to my husband. That's about 24 years ago. And she recommended that I should get inner healing from Pastor Jenny. And that's when I found out that Pastor Jenny is actually the wife of Pastor Robert. So again, divine appointment, right? Yeah. And so that's the story I always remember for myself. It's like God works in an interesting way. Last night, God revealed something to me I didn't really think about. See, when I met Pastor Robert, he prayed for my dad issue. When I met Pastor Jenny, she prayed for my marriage issue. I always thought it's a two separate issue, right? So in the human eyes, God used this couple to minister to me in a different season of my life on a very different subject of trouble. But it's actually linked. They link very closely, and it goes to the one source of a deep problem that really took a deep root in my life, and that is the fatherlessness. So I want to talk about that fatherlessness. My husband just recently went to India mission, and he just came back day before I came to Cambodia. So while he was gone, my daughter and I were praying for him every night. And then I don't know why, but one day, just looking at her, I told her, "You're so blessed to have a father who loves the Lord." And I described to her the part of my life that I grew up without a dad as it was like a house without fence. And I said it and I caught myself saying that, and I'm like, wow, that's kind of profound. Spiritually, it is so true. Imagine a house without fence. Any thieves can come to rob you anytime. You are open to all kinds of attacks, all sides. That was my spiritual life until God really reached out and delivered me from all those. So I was born into a very dysfunctional, non-Christian family. My father was really heavily into gambling addiction. So if some of you are familiar with a family member or a friend who are into gambling, really addiction, they can really dry out all your finances and resources, right? They'll do anything. Sort of like people who are like addict to the drug or heroin. They'll sell anything to get that. And that was my dad. And he had a very obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, because he always considered himself dirty. So he was control freak when it comes to his family. Everybody has to be clean. Every household, every part of the house has to be absolutely clean. And it drove us really crazy. So ever since I was a little child, I don't remember how many times, but in my memory, every single time we have a meal, I'll get hit. Because my hand is touching the floor or my hand is touching my hair, and he just will slap me. And I'll cry at the lunch table or dinner table. That was the memory of my dad. Very intimidating, very violent, always angry. And because of his addiction to gambling, we lived on the run. We were always running away from people that he owed money. So we moved pretty much every year, if not a few times a year. And he was so afraid that people will track him down through the school information, school record. I couldn't go to school. So I was kept inside of my house or wherever we were each time for 6 years. So you guys had a pandemic for 2.5 years. I had my own personal pandemic for 6 years. and I couldn't hang out with friends. So when I turned almost 13, that was the first time I came out to the society, sort of, because I had to go, finally, I was too old, and I missed the entire elementary school. So I had to go to this institute to prep me for some government testing in order to apply for next education, to go to junior high, because I was too old to go to elementary school and do it all over. And in that period of time, during that time of going to this institution, about less than a year, I made some friends there, and I didn't know one of them was affiliated with the gangsters. And somehow this person was so pressured by the gangsters. Long story short, one day he told me to meet him at a certain point, and I went after my class to meet with him at the location, but he wasn't there, but this group of gangsters was there. So I was kidnapped, I was gang raped, and I was about to be sold for trafficking. They had a plan to bring me down to a different city next day. And in that little room while I was locked, I cried out to God. I've never been to church in my life, but I knew about Jesus because my mom always prayed to Jesus, even though she didn't go to church, because my dad was an atheist. He never allowed us to go to church. She had a sort of blind faith. So I cried out to Jesus, please help me to get out. And he gave me a wisdom to lie to a group of gangsters. I don't know how I came up with the lie and how dumb of him to believe my lie, but I came up with the lie that my parents are actually kind of prestige people. But because I had a health issue when I was young, I couldn't go to the regular school. That's why I'm going through this institution. So if they find out, you're gonna get into trouble. But if you let me go now, I'm not gonna make any trouble, I promise, because they'll be too ashamed to reveal what happened to me. They had a meeting all night, and for whatever reason, they let me go. So it was the longest night, longest journey from that place to go back home in the middle of the night. As a 13-year-old, beat up, all bruised, bleeding, and I walked home. And as soon as I pressed the doorbell, my dad grabbed me and started beating me inside. And from the way, the state of my look, he already kind of guessed all the possible worst thing that could ever happen to his daughter. Yet he didn't give me a chance to explain what happened to me. So this is the sort of background of where my journey with spiritual father, Heavenly Father began. But even in my little mind, I always remember God gave me that wisdom to get out of there. So I'm going to talk about spiritual warfare. Through all that I went through, fear and anxiety disorder was natural. I never got any counseling until I met Moon. Habitual lies out of insecurity. Since then, I always lied. Whoever I meet, especially when I meet new people, I lied about my background, about my education, about my parents. I lied everything. And sleep paralysis and insomnia because of the nightmare. And it's interesting because my nightmare was not just a nightmare, but there's something called sleep paralysis. It's something that if you didn't have it, you will never understand. But people who had it, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. you actually see the demon and the spiritual attack, and it's physical reality. Okay, I see demon face to face and attached to my body. And you know, they even raped you in the middle of the night. But God can set you free because He set me free. And demonic manifestation. Addictive personalities, OCD, right? My dad's OCD, generational curse. Anger, rage, self-hate, because I blame myself for the longest time for being unable to fight back and save myself, or smart enough not to be in the place that I shouldn't be. Depression, suicidal, death wishes, all my life. And stomach issues, develop physical issues. Stomach issues, acid reflux, back problem. So back problem was a real deal. Like ever since I was 20, like as a college student, all the way through, I think, age 30, I suffer from backache. I can say all these things because God healed me from all of these. And I'm going to talk about healing and deliverance that I experienced. When I, prayed to Jesus in that room, it's not like I forgot about Him. I often prayed to Jesus. And I often really sincerely desired to develop deeper relationship with God. And I had a habit of talking to myself anyway. And then one day my mom told me, instead of talking to yourself, because you will do all the time, turn that thought to talking to God. So I'm like, that's a good idea. So I became habit of talking to God all the time. So that was my prayer, unchurched. But sometimes I think that's better. Because when I went to church later, because my mom and I, later we ran away from my dad when I was 15 years old, when we came to America. I realized the actual Christians in church pray differently. Some of the immediate breakthrough that I experienced in college year, this was like probably a year before I met Pastor Robert in the conference. Like, I decided to really follow Jesus, not just believe in Him and occasionally talk to Him. I really committed my life. God, I'm going to give my life to follow You. And after that immediate breakthrough I experienced was the sleep paralysis. And God gave me a vision of that night, I remember, after that prayer, that very night, I had a vision of me pushing the Satan off the, like a balcony. Like, I was kind of like a captive in his house, but in the dream, I said, I have to follow Christ. I have to get out of here. And I pushed the demon out of the balcony, and I started to run without looking back. And after that dream, I never had that experience ever again. Yeah. And He also delivered me from worldly desires eventually. Like, I was very into alcohol and party every Friday, I wait for the Friday and I just go party, all the dance party around every campus in Boston area. But God said no. I had to separate my worldly desires and all these vanity things. And I also had to stop hanging out with the wrong people. God separated me. And when I did that, He delivered me from all these addictions. And He gave me the courage and conviction to cut off ungodly relationships. So I was like dating the guy after guy after guy after guy. It's not even serious, but it's just like for sake of just continuing that feeling of constantly, I'm with somebody at least. It doesn't matter who, somebody. But God said you don't need that anymore because nothing's going to fill that void. So I used to think, there's one pastor I met who had no idea about my life because I never shared this kind of side of my life to anyone at the time. And he said, Kana, I think you're going to be a pastor's wife. But I didn't know the prophetics or things of the prophetic at the time. I'm like, he's got to be kidding me. He has no idea of my life. I said, I can be anybody's wife, but pastor's wife, because of my past, right? But my husband's a pastor. Yeah, and he knows all my life, all my past, and he loves me so much. Yeah, he's a very strong man, but he's also very tender. He delivered me from eating disorder. I was going through a lot of eating disorder in college year. It all stems back. It's my fault. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. You know, what kind of man will take somebody like me, think that you can just do whatever? I must be like a piece of whatever, you know, that they kind of think like, oh, this kind of woman, you can do that. Like, I always had that lie in my head. I am one of those women that these bad men look at and somehow separate me from the rest of the women. Women that are not worthy to be protected. And God had to work in me to break that lies. So that eating disorder, negative self-image, all those addictions, God started to break down. And he gave me joy. And ever since I was a child, I never knew what joy is. I think naturally children are supposed to play with other kids to understand the joy and the laughter. But I'm an only child. And my dad always told me I'm just a mistake. He never planned to have a baby. But it just happened. So only thing closest to love that he told me is, I'm sorry that I never loved you. That's all I heard. So lies that I believe, these are some of the major things. I can't trust men. And I have to be perfect in order to be good. I'm ugly. I should have been a boy. Yeah, I curse that I'm a woman. Yeah. But you know, God works in so much wonderful way, like above and beyond of your imagination. Right? You can't predict how God works. Just like God plays Pastor Rob in my 20s, plays Pastor Jenny in my 30s, plays Moon in my life to walk beside me every single day for the past 24 years. God has each of your life on the palm of his hand. And every relationship, godly relationship, is not a coincidence. Okay. You are here in this conference by God's intricate design. Timing, people who are here, everything is so perfectly orchestrated. Okay. So what do you think happened? What do you think it happened to my dad? Not so nice person. Anybody can guess what happened to my dad? Being a gambler all his life, alcoholic, abusive, atheist who hate God, who doesn't even let his family to go to church, and later abandoned by his own family. So one night, this is when I was in my 40, early 40 or mid 40. One night God woke me up. My family were sleeping, and I was walking around my living room, and somehow one book caught my eye in the bookshelf. And my husband has so much book, but out of all the books, in the middle of the dim light, I took that book out. As soon as I opened, one picture fell off. And that was the one picture I have of my dad. I didn't know I had. And I broke down and cried that night in the middle of the dark living room. And I realized I'm not crying because of the bitterness anymore. I'm not crying because I'm sad and hurt anymore. I realized that night I am totally healed. I cried because for the first time, I was crying over my dad's picture because I realized I still love him. He's the only dad I know. And I thank God that night for giving me my life. Because of him, I'm here. And I wanted him to know that he has this wonderful daughter who's a child of God. And I realized this is also his story. It's not just about my life, but this is about his life. Everything I went through, God never forgot about him. I'm part of his life. I'm part of his healing. I'm part of his journey. So I realized God is not done with him. So I frantically searched his phone number that week. I found his phone number and I called and I got connected to him. And at my first hello in Korean, he recognized my voice right away. He couldn't say hello back. But you know what he said? After like 10-second pause, he said, I'm sorry for everything that I've done and I didn't do for you. I'm sorry. He was a homeless, living in a mountain somewhere. But he had a cell phone. So I said, Dad, I'm married to a pastor. And I said, I have forgiven you. I'm not bitter. I'm thankful. And can you please go to church? So I heard he went to church that Sunday. Within a year, he was baptized. He made a public confession. He became a deacon. He also had a 4-stage throat cancer at that time. God healed him. God completely healed him. It disappeared. The cancer just disappeared. So he was invited to give testimony, like I'm giving testimony here. So his small local church got big fund from a big church that he went and spoke. And he's now reaching out to old men like himself who struggle with alcohol and other addiction. He became head of men's ministry of his local church at age 82. So I know my God is this kind of God. Amen. And this God is yours. Yeah, this God is yours. So whoever is praying for salvation of your family member, I know there are many times, this person, there's no way. I'm praying anyway because it's my duty, but you know deep inside you don't have much hope. I know that feeling. But I'm giving my testimony to renew that hope. God can do anything. Praise to God.